Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on the issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
I'm absolutely convinced that the basic blocking and tackling that we've been talking about for 18 years is still a problem. So we can start talking about this next generation, whatever. But when you walk in the door of most organizations that haven't even really given it a lot of focus, and that's a high number of organizations, right? The things that we should be teaching in high school, you know, from just a positioning standpoint within the tech community is still a problem.
Are still the biggest problem.
Yeah.
All right. So we are talking to Joe Bonnell, who is the founder and CEO of Alchemy Security. So that was a good intro. I love that. The biggest problem right now, from Joe's perspective, is still the thing that we've been doing for 18 years, right?
Yeah.
And that is you see that as a technology solution, or is that a people problem?
It's the classic technology people process. The technology problem's been solved for a long time, right? We've got all these tools to do endpoint analysis on, you know, to determine whether, you know, systems in compliance to whatever hardening standard you choose. Mm-hmm. Most organizations aren't using that effectively. We've got lots of technology, you know, and then you've got the people and process component too, right? So, and what we continue to see, and I think the industry continues to see, is that, you know, we still got a fundamental problem with, you know, how security dollars are being allocated to companies, right? Mm-hmm. Big focus on capital acquisition. Let me buy that thing. Oh, I feel better now. I bought that thing, right? Without really providing the staff and the OpEx dollars required to make whatever it is, that thing that you bought, you know, including things like SIEM, which is very complex technology, really deriving value out of that platform.
So making the tools you buy actually do something for you.
Sure, yeah.
So the problem isn't, you know, everybody wants to go out and buy a solution and just plug it in and make it work, right?
Yep.
You want to buy an iPhone, you want to answer calls, you want to do your texting, you want to do whatever, right?
Yep.
So SIEM, you mentioned that word. Explain what that means. Give us a definition.
So SIEM is short for Security Event Information Management.
Okay.
Or Information Event, yeah. Sorry, I get confused
I
sometimes.
always heard it as monitoring. Security Information Event Monitoring.
Yeah. Well, so, and what's really about is, you know, big data is a big buzzword these days. And,
yeah.
And outside of finance, I think SIEM was kind of the best use case of kind of the big data story. Really designed to accept all kinds of information from all these different event sources, and then it's up to us as practitioners to convert, you know, all these event logs into something that is meaningful and relevant in the context of identifying a breach in process.
Okay, so now let's go back. We said connecting all these things and all this.
Sure.
Explain how that SIEM and what are you connecting to?
Okay, so we typically like to start with firewalls, IPSs, anything that's at your perimeter.
So you take your network things that are infrastructure.
Sure. Security devices.
You run a separate line into them, right?
So a lot of network-enabled security devices transmit via syslog. So all these event messages that are being generated. So you think about a firewall event. You've got a user somewhere on the internet that's requesting access to google.com. Mm-hmm. And google.com has some firewalls in front of that that's limiting access to either port 80 or port 443, which are the two common ports for web browser traffic, mm-hmm. and block everything else. So if you think about a firewall, it's just like an on-ramp to wherever you're trying to go. It limits where you can go in very specific ways, but also can give you a lot of information.
So it keeps logs.
Yep.
And you're plugging the SIEM into the logs from the firewall, the logs from the routers, the logs from all your systems across the network, and making a one place where you can view it all.
That was the big idea with SIEM in the early days was I want a single pane of glass to give me situational awareness around my antivirus products or endpoint protection in general, my network security products. When you think about kind of these next generation firewalls now that provide all these, it's not just a firewall, it's an IPS, it's a malware detonation device, all these things. You get lots of relevant security value out of the information from those devices. And so when you think about the way attackers compromise networks, we come from a place where we never want to trust one particular endpoint. So a domain controller is something that we would want to monitor because that's where your centralized authentication occurs for most organizations, right? Really important device. Servers can tell us all kinds of things, but we don't necessarily like to trust any of those individual things. We like to take a higher level view
Of a whole bunch of different things.
of like maybe I can't trust that endpoint, but I'll trust that firewall to tell me how that endpoint is behaving,
Okay.
right? So, typically attackers don't compromise everything at once. It's usually either a server.
So you're looking for the cascading attacks where you one thing, then another, then another, then another, by monitoring them all and putting them all in a big workstation
Sure.
on a single monitor, like you see in the movies, right? Where the NSA and the FBI have a bunch of monitors in front of them, and they're monitoring all the networks.
Right.
That's kind of what we're talking about, right?
It's kind of what we're talking about. Not as Hollywood-esque as we've seen in the movies yet. The day-to-day blocking and tackling is a very challenging job, for sure. It's one where I think, in some cases, wherever we can delegate to technology more, that makes a lot of sense. And we're even focused on that from our own standpoint of how do we do better faster?
Okay.
How do we take the unimportant things that, like when it comes to, so we've got this technology SIEM, and then we've got this whole cast of really awesome people behind it, right? Or either reviewing events from antivirus or an IPS sensor or that sort of thing. And then we've got people that are keeping the lights on for that SIEM infrastructure to continue to ingest logs from all these different event sources.
So this is a very human touch centric process then.
It's
not automated, like all just works in the background by itself.
You get out of it what you put into it, I think is
Okay.
the best way to say it. So you can extract a lot of leverage from that if you put the right engineering cycles in on the front end to automate what your intrusion analysts may or may not spend their time on the back end.
Okay. Well, let's take a break. We'll come back in a couple minutes after we hear from our sponsors.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
So welcome back. We are talking to Joe Bonnell from Alchemy Security, and we were kind of defining what a SIEM platform was and giving everybody a visual of what we're looking at here. Now, let's talk about when does an organization get to the point where they need to use a SIEM? They need to start looking at it. What do you usually see come in the door that says, hey, we need to start, we're at this point? Size of a company, what do you think?
It comes down to a couple of factors. I mean, if you're in the Fortune 50, you're probably going to want to build your own SOC.
SOC. Describe that.
Security Operations Center.
And that's all the panels and the screens you see people sit behind in the movies.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, right?
That's what we're talking about, right? And they're relying on the security technologies that provide all this. Just think of it as like, if you were to kind of translate it to the human intelligence world, you've got all these kind of people out, and they're listening to things, and they're telling you things that are happening, and it's up to the analyst to identify whether that's normal or abnormal, right? And so we've got, and then what we develop in conjunction with SIEM and all this data are what we describe as security monitoring use cases that occur in a SOC. So an example would be that device has the crown jewels, and I want to know anytime it even tries to talk to the internet, because that would be weird, right?
So that's usually like a database with the credit card numbers, right?
That, or could be intellectual property if you're a defense contractor.
Gotcha.
Could be healthcare information if you're a healthcare provider. Different organizations have a different set of crown jewels, but every organization has a set of crown jewels. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be in business, right?
Okay.
They have something of value that they're providing to society. So, where we see the adoption of security monitoring and SIEM really comes from either the forward-looking organizations that have had a significant breach, live to tell the tale, and want to do a better job of trying to preemptively stop, an attacker from having a toehold into an environment to being able to kind of pillage whatever they want, because
So
nobody's.
you just hit the key point, I think, is somebody that's already had a breach. Is that who usually starts doing this kind of monitoring?
Typically, when it comes to like an organization wanting to build their own SOC, it's either that or they've just got forward-looking people on the team that can articulate the right story to leadership to get the funding for that. The probably larger use case and more common is all these compliance requirements. So when you look at HIPAA as a compliance standard, right? It's kind of a crappy standard in some ways. It's also the only one that could say you could go to jail if you're not, demonstrating due diligence with patient information, right? But what the standard says, do a risk assessment, identify things that are risky, and take appropriate action, essentially, if you were to kind of distill it up, right?
So monitoring them all the time is appropriate actions, what you're saying.
The one thing it is kind of clear about is security monitoring.
Okay.
And so that's how we help customers with this very, it's kind of the deep end of the pool is the way I describe it. I've spent years running pen testing teams. We still do pen testing, web application testing, source code analysis. Customers still need all those things. But the analogy I like to use is it's a lot more difficult to protect a bridge than blowing it up.
Okay. So now let's go on the other side.
Sure.
Who doesn't need SIEM?
I think these days, I almost entertain like even a consumer-related product to just tell me when my kids have downloaded something that is now on my home network. Right? I mean, from a practical standpoint, that's where we are. Smaller organizations, they're certainly probably not going to buy a SIEM. They're not going to staff a SOC. They're not going to, because just the engineering efforts alone are somewhat Herculean in some ways, particularly getting the right use cases firing to the analysts to do their work.
So I guess maybe how much does it cost? What's an implementation of a SIEM run for a company from start to finish?
It can be as expensive as companies want to spend. It can be as cheap as companies want to spend.
Oh, come on. You got to give me something more than that.
Well,
give me some numbers you've seen.
Yeah, okay. So like big pharmaceutical company would probably spend, if they want a 24/7 operation, and these exist around the world, right? They're spending north of $1.5 million a year just on labor.
Okay. But
So
putting it together.
Putting it together, the thing is you can stand up the technology on day one, but what most organizations lack is all the process procedures, use case framework to derive value out of it within the first 3 months.
So it's not, when you first stand it up, it doesn't require running a bunch of new cables, connecting stuff. It's all using existing networks, right?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
So implementing the software, the SIEM software, is a relatively straightforward process. Giving event source owners to give up their logs to send them to the SIEM there's always some political dynamics. It's changed over time. In the early days, firewall administrators weren't necessarily fond of sending over event logs for fear of, like maybe they might be exposed for not doing something or whatever. So kind of a lack of understanding about what the technology was about.
So the first part is, well, first of all, what's a minimum cost with an expenditure that a company could see with a SIEM?
We see there are some very low cost kind of foot in the door products that customers buy. The challenge is, and that can run as low as $5,000 for that software.
Okay.
Challenge is it's not, you're getting what you're paying for.
So $5,000 entry point, and then
Yep.
you got to pay somebody to staff it full time to kind of
Sure.
do the monitoring.
And then what typically happens is the CIO or somebody that's like, well, you're the firewall admin, you're also the admin of this thing too, and if there's anything that pops up, you're kind of on the hook to deal with that, and also make that work, and also make that person happy, and oh crap, this thing's on fire, so I need you to focus on that. And so what ends up happening a lot of times, if you don't provide dedicated resource for that, is they too many competing interests from too many different areas. Just you're almost worse off at having the technology and not catching things that are happening because you're not really applying the resources to it, versus like just dedicating the right people and right technology to getting the job done.
So again, we come back to that's very kind of human intensive of someone being there to start making a baseline, knowing what's normal first, right?
Yep.
And once you know what's normal, how long does it take for someone that, if you got the $5,000 SIEM, you
Sure.
had somebody full time to start making a baseline.
Sure.
How long does it take where you say, okay, now I know what's normal. Let
Well,
me
that's-
start looking at the variances.
So that's probably going to be a pretty small shop, 25 servers or less. These low-end cost technologies are okay for kind of that size environment. When you start talking about real scale, it's just not, it's like using a craftsman when you're, a professional mechanic, and, everybody else is using Mac for a reason, right?
Okay.
The time, it's one of these things like we were talking about earlier about, how there's always this kind of, we're waiting for the right kind of set of information before we can say go. And when it comes to security monitoring, it really is a maturation process that happens over time. So we've seen Fortune 50 organizations spend 3 years maturing their security monitoring program. And this is with a staff of 15 to 25 people, just dedicated to the subject, either monitoring or engineering, that sort of thing. But obviously very, extensive networks, lots of complexity. So it takes a lot of time. So it's really kind of a function of the size of your environment, how well you already know your environment. Right? A lot of times, so we ask customers, we have this process where when we start to integrate a new customer leveraging this technology, we'll ask them what the crown jewels are. And should they be talking to the internet, things like that. And a lot of times they don't know.
Okay. Well, let's take a break here and let's hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Over 3 million data breaches happen every single day. That's over 2,000 records being compromised every minute. So often, we focus on securing web data access. But what if the attackers are already inside, having gained direct access to your storage through data management software? When it comes to communications that go directly into your storage devices, make SNIA your first line of protection. SNIA's conformance testing limits outdated communications that are known to be used by attackers. It works continuously behind the background to make sure your storage is protected. To find out if your data is truly secure, visit our website at www.snia.org/cybertest.
So welcome back. We're talking to Joe Bonnell again here about security information event monitoring. And before we were talking about some of the cost points, some of the timelines to get involved, and it seems like it's for a big organization. It's for the Fortune 500, the Fortune 50, the Fortune 10 almost, to get a really big successful implementation. But if I wanted to say, I've talked to some companies recently that do this cyber hunting as a process, and they come onto your network.
Sure.
If I wanted to kind of engage somebody as a third party that does this for me, what's out there, and how could I get to that point as in a minimal cost point or just
Right.
an entry level?
Well, and that's where companies like Alchemy come in. So we're always looking for leverage across the industry. As practitioners, we're trying to find better, and where are those specific lever points that we can help organizations get better. So the reality is buying your own product, implementing it yourself, and managing it is really kind of beyond the capabilities of most shops. And even some of the most successful ones have to retool their SOCs regularly. And this is where MSSPs really come into play. So as part of our services that we provide customers, it includes, if a customer wants hunt team analysis as part of security monitoring, we can include that as part of the cost.
So you sit outside of their network and do this for them? Okay. So it's a kind of a shared service then?
Sure, it's a leverage service.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
And what type of a cost point, we talked about kind of the cost points and the commitment for that internally. What types, have you outsourced this to somebody like Alchemy? And I think Route 9B had a similar type of hunting externally on your network.
Sure.
What type of a cost point can you see in that area?
So it depends on kind of how deep a customer wants us to go. Our lowest price point service is perimeter monitoring, to where we'll take the security spend that a customer's already invested in with next-gen firewalls or IPSs, security technologies at the perimeter. We'll integrate that in and monitor that on behalf of a customer. And that's around $2,400 a month.
Okay.
And then it just kind of goes up from there.
And what size company, is that for small and medium-sized companies?
Really small to medium, size businesses. What is always surprising is how many medium to large size enterprises, don't really have that.
A lot of companies want to outsource that. They don't want to have that internally. It just
and it's the right thing to do as long as you get the right kind of provider involved. We've picked up business from some of the larger players, partially just because they've gotten so kind of locked into their own set of technology that they leverage those sensors on networks, and that's their whole thing. And they might have 1,500 customers, and they've got good visibility across 1,500 customers, but it's kind of a one size fits all. And for most organizations, you can't take a one size fits all approach to security monitoring.
Interesting. Let's talk about products. There's you said the big vendors and whatever. That's the products, and I guess I'm sure you utilize many different products.
Yep.
Tell me about some of them and what we can expect from the pluses and minuses for each.
Sure. We really got our start with SIEM and SOC with ArcSight. You might remember.
And that's an HP product, right?
HP acquired ArcSight, which was kind of the sad ending to ArcSight. But, ArcSight, in the early days, certainly by 2010, that was the Cadillac of SIEMs. And really good connectors to be able to, because one of the things that you have to do with all this big data is normalize it. So ArcSight has some really great connectors, still has the best real-time correlation engine out there on the market.
Okay.
So we grew up with ArcSight, and that's where we ended up, helping customers.
So is it changing now that it's under HP, and has it stifled some of the innovation on it?
Yeah, and they've had a kind of a significant kind of brain drain over time with HP, and now it's being spun off to Micro Focus. So
maybe it'll get more micro-focused.
Maybe, I don't know. And on the other end of the spectrum, we worked with a product for Alien Vault for a while for our customers in hosted environments. So we partner with hosting companies and managed colo providers that that need to provide this service to their customers.
And that's Alien Vault sells that product?
Yeah. Well, they sell kind of I wouldn't characterize it as a competing product. It's a great kind of entry level. If you got nothing, you might want to start there.
Is it like an open source?
What they did is they took a bunch of open source products and integrated that and then called it something new.
Okay.
And we worked with that product for a while, but we ended up kind of having to kind of change direction because Alien Vault just really couldn't scale. We have customers that start small, and then all of a sudden, they went from 25 servers to over 100 in just a year and a half period.
And that didn't scale very well.
And the technology didn't scale. So,
okay.
We've got other products such as Logarithm. We've got QRadar that IBM acquired.
Yeah, I knew of QRadar. Talk about Logarithm. What do you think about that product?
Interesting product. Local company, so I always love local. For us, we ended up kind of going.
Yeah, I think they're one of these cards on my desk here.
Yeah, there you go. And lots of great people over at Logarithm. We ended up kind of going in a different direction. We ended up choosing Splunk as kind of our overall technology platform moving forward. There was lots of reasons for that, but one of the biggest reasons was hunt team analysis. So ArcSight is not an awesome hunting tool.
Okay.
Alien Vault, there's no way. Logarithm has been moving in the direction of hunt and incorporating Elastic in their back end, but we really got to the point where we didn't want to build our own log collection and management platform. So Splunk made a lot of sense for us to be able to kind of cover the...
Splunk, who makes that? Is that the name of the company?
That's the name of the company. Yeah, they're a West Coast company.
Okay.
Do about just north of $1 billion in sales. So rapidly expanding company.
Okay.
They got their start in helping developers debug code. So it was a great tool to search through all these logs, looking for for debugging purposes. And as Splunk grew up, they really realized that they could be an enterprise class log collection platform to not only leverage big data for security, but also for other things like marketing analysis or business intelligence. So, and that's a product that really almost allows the analyst to be the engineer. So when you think about business analysts, they're typically cooking up their own kind of use cases of, I want to see how many times this kind of customer bought that. And what Splunk really kind of bridged the gap between the engineer or the analyst having to go to a database, admin saying, can you please create a report for me that does Y? So Splunk really kind of allows users to short circuit that analysis process no matter what it is.
Okay.
And we realized that there was lots of things that we liked about Splunk and that we could actually kind of roll our own security monitoring tool on top of Splunk. So we're letting Splunk do the heavy lifting. And I think that's really where the future of all this goes. And
it's going towards this cyber hunt.
Well, not just that, which is certainly a relevant topic, but when you look at the logarithms or the Q radars or the ArcSights of the world, very kind of special purpose built tool for security monitoring, and not taking advantage of any others. There's no data reuse for IT operations.
Gotcha.
There's no data reuse for business intelligence when you're already capturing the same data for one set of use cases. It can be used for all these other things too. And so for us, it made a lot of sense as a services organization to pick the right technology that allows us to scale in the ways that we need to, and also allow us to build our own platform on top of it. So we're making our analysts more effective in their job, but customers can also leverage this to solve other use cases that are not security related, reusing that same data. So that's where strategically, that's where I think all this goes.
Okay. So if we let's talk about your company and what kind of offerings you have. Obviously, a great wealth of knowledge of what you're doing in SIEM, all the different platforms, when to use it, what companies need, what time frames. So if you're a company looking to say, do I need to monitor? When do I start? We've had a breach, now we want to go to the next level. Tell us about what you guys offer and to what level of companies.
Sure. We help companies solve that problem. So we do other things too, but the thing that we're kind of recognized by Gartner for is our capabilities in managing and monitoring and the operational aspects of SIEM. So a lot of our customers are compliance-driven customers. They want better than a checkbox. We have customers that are just kind of checkbox customers too. So they just want to make sure the logs are being ingested in and somebody's looking at them daily. So we've really tailored our services to help organizations that are struggling with DFARS, which is not going to move again at the end of this year, HIPAA and PCI. So
not going to move again. I know what they postponed the required time for everybody to be in compliance.
Yes.
But you said that's not going to happen again. So they've got to get hot on it, and companies got to make these.
It's probably the fastest growing area of the conversations that we're having at the moment.
Okay.
Healthcare, certainly a big driver for us in the HIPAA space and the requirement around security monitoring. But we've talked to a lot of companies that are taking a lot of funding from the DoD that, if they're a sub to a prime that's, being pushed towards, NIST 800 171, security monitoring is one of those requirements, and it's probably it's the most difficult aspect, in my opinion, of information security.
Okay. So in closing, give us a way they can reach out to you, site, email if you want.
Great. So Alchemy Security, it's ALCHEMY security.com. Visit our website, or you can hit me at Jobo, Jobo, at alchemysecurity.com, and can certainly get your listeners plugged into how we can help them solve the security monitoring and kind of compliance challenges associated with all the things that we can do with big data.
All right.
And SIEM.
Well, thanks a lot for joining today, Joe. Definitely been a pleasure. Giving me a lot of information that I can use myself.
Outstanding.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks.
The views or opinions expressed by me during this podcast are my own and are not those of my employer, Colorado Technical University.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.
So everybody sits back and collects all the information they can.
Sure.
Every source they can get it from, right?
Right.
And when they have all the information, then they'll talk, right? Then they'll do something with it.
Right.
But nowadays there's more information you could possibly ever gather.
That's right.
So we're stuck in this gathering, because we never have it all.
Right.
And it's kind of like a blight on the whole profession, I would say. That we just don't get anywhere because we're continuously in this simulative paradox, I call it.
Sure. Yeah.
Data collectors.